This health innovation themed episode of Advancing Healthcare Through Simulation is brought to you by Amedico and Health Everywhere Hub. Welcome back to Advancing Healthcare Through Simulation. Today we're joined by Dr. Mary Brindle, a pediatric surgeon and internationally recognized leader in surgical quality improvement and health systems innovation. Dr. Brindle serves as Academic Director of W21C Research and Innovation Center at the University of Calgary and is the project lead for the Health Everywhere Hub initiative and theme lead for the Health Everywhere remote monitoring and virtual care portfolio. She also serves as the Director of Safe Surgery and Safe Systems Program at the Ariadne Labs in Harvard, Chair of Equius, the Equity, Quality, Innovation, and Safety Research Platform at the Alberta Children's Hospital, and Executive Secretary of the International Enhanced Recovery After Surgery Society. Through these various roles, she works to advance local, national, and global efforts to improve surgical outcomes through evidence-based care. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm really excited to learn more about your work today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I think I'd like to start out, you've been very deeply involved in improving surgical systems and healthcare innovation. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your work and what really drew you to focus on transforming the operating room environment?
Well, I'm a surgeon, so obviously, part of my interest comes from my background and what I see every day and the problems that I encounter regularly. I'm also a health systems researcher, and surgical care it's incredibly high risk. It's incredibly expensive. It's also a situation that brings together lots of different people from different professions and includes a lot of technology. So it's an area that I think there's a huge opportunity to improve things. It's an area that I feel is really, particularly right now, is a really great place for us to understand what happens when you take teams and technology and bring them together in the same space.
Yeah, definitely lots to explore, I'm sure. And the Health Everywhere Hub has, been on this journey, building relationships, testing ideas, and learning what it takes to really move the needle in digital health innovation in Alberta. Can you take us back to the beginning and tell us how Health Everywhere Hub came to be and what you've learned along the way? And maybe what's next? That's a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. No worries though. It's been an exciting journey. The whole Health Everywhere Hub came up from an opportunity that was through the Major Innovation Fund. And basically, they were looking for large cross-provincial teams that were going to address large areas that fit in line with the Alberta government's current priorities. And so we were one of the groups that put together an application and were fortunate enough to be chosen. The whole experience was really interesting for me for a number of reasons. One is that I got to work with a great team at W21C. There's a lot of people who I think would warrant a shout out for this, but Jill DeGrood and Shane Varani. But there was also a huge team outside of that, from University of Calgary, University of Alberta, as well as the technical colleges, the universities in the south and in the north, as well as communities, a huge number of people who came together, and from different spheres. There were clinicians, but there were also digital health specialists, there were engineers, there were computer scientists, community members. It was a really interesting team, and so that was quite an experience. The other thing is that the funding came from the Ministry of Technology and Innovation, so a bit of a different way of thinking about this problem than I'm used to. I'm a health systems researcher. I'm a clinician. So much of the way that I think about health problems centers around a way of looking looking at these issues from that particular lens, that particular perspective. And I got to learn something in this that was unexpected for me, which was how we can look at introducing and studying technology in a way that's different than what we typically do in research. So in research, usually the whole process is got a lot of safeguards around it, which are incredibly important. I mean, research has to be highly rigorous, it has to have a great deal of trust. We have to protect the patients and the participants, and that data needs to stand on its own and usually gets published in the peer review literature. That process is long, it's arduous. As I say, a lot of protections, but technology moves really quickly. And a lot of grants that I'd been involved with before that have followed this sort of very traditional research pathway, by the time that grant funding is achieved and you're actually able to spend it and you're able to do the study, things have shifted, and the whole spectrum that you're working in is very different than when you started to put the grant together. And so in the kind of the business and innovation world, in the software development world, there is this way of looking at how we develop things, which is much faster, much closer to the user, much more iteratively developing. So you're really used to getting a tool, immediately putting it into the place where you're hoping it's going to work, getting feedback right away, changing it, redeveloping it. And that was something that was really new to me, particularly working with groups like Alberta Innovates, Innovate Calgary, and the Spark Group. I mean, that kind of gave me a new perspective on how we can sort of meld some of this rigor of research with a much more flexible and rapid approach to understanding innovation.
It sounds like a very interesting way as well, being so closely connected to what's happening as it's, evolving. Like you say, it must be with more rapid process, more cyclical, getting that feedback and continuing to improve. Would you say difference there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hugely different, and I feel like both. It gives an opportunity for both sort of areas to learn from each other. I think that in this world where technology is advancing quickly and we're seeing it impact patient care, we have to think about ways that we can understand the products that we produce and make them truly excellent. And one of the things right now is that if we take a tool and develop it by the traditional process, you've kind of invested in one solution, and the whole grant is written around this one thing. And to be able to sort of, as we were talking about, cyclically develop that, make it better and better, you could produce something great. I mean, that's what people use in their homes right now. There's a lot of the digital technology that we have every day has been produced by that kind of process. So a lot that we can learn from that.
I love this. As someone who comes from interprofessional education, it really promotes what I'm telling my students about multiple perspectives can improve and enhance the experience. So this is fantastic.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, it's great.
I'm really interested to hear about the concept of the living lab in healthcare, why this model is gaining traction to accelerate innovation, and what makes testing innovation in the real clinical and community environment so different from a traditional pilot or a controlled trial.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think it was great that W21C is the group that started the Health Everywhere Hub, and our current priorities right now. One of the things you'd asked me earlier on was where we were heading next in the whole Health Everywhere group, and in our last year and a half or so of this, we're really going to focus on this living lab idea. And that kind of comes back a little bit to our origins at W21C. Initially, there was an idea that was created around an inpatient ward lab. And that was first developed recognizing that there were all sorts of industries and innovators who were interested in seeing how their products would work in the real setting. And we're, of course, interested in many of the same types of things, understanding how we can improve care. I, a little bit like I was saying before, traditional trials are really trying to control the environment in which you're testing something. You don't want messiness. You want things always done the same way. You want a patient population that looks relatively similar. You want people following a protocol in a trial, but none of that looks a lot like real life. So if we have a way, instead of saying we want to create spaces, philosophies, groups of people who are innovation ready, people who can recognize when there's opportunities to bring new things into our work environments and explore them in that messiness and understand how they work and bring this sort of creative way of looking at them. And industries will love this too because they don't want to go through a ton of work to find out that the product that they've produced really isn't going to be effective in the real world environment, that people aren't going to adopt it or like it, or that it's just not going to fit into a workflow. And this gives us an opportunity to really understand what those things look like right there in the field or in the real world setting.
And so I feel like you may have spoken to this in what you just shared, but why will it be so important to clinicians, researchers, technologists, and industry partners to collaborate within these ecosystems rather than working in silos to help solve these healthcare problems?
You know what? I'm happy to elaborate on that a little more because I think it's a really key point. Um, and that collaboration, I think, happens at a number of different levels. Like, for example, even if I just focus on the clinicians involved, and so as I say, I'm a surgeon, I work within a surgical team. A lot of the times when we develop a research project, we develop it in our own little silo. So me as like a surgeon with other surgeons will develop this idea without actually understanding how that impacts the other people that I work with. Whether they're OR or ward nurses, whether they're anesthesiologists, or even whether they're the ancillary physicians, nursing staff, and other medical staff around me. I mean, all of those perspectives are important when we're creating something that's going to be working in the environment. And of course, like the patient key central to all of the work that we do. And those are perspectives that we're increasing our awareness of in medicine. But, when we actually sort of broaden our gaze a little bit and think about the spaces that we're working about in the technology that we're working with, that kind of collaboration and understanding is going to help not just sort of testing the devices that someone else has already developed in prototypes, but also informing what they should be looking at. What's the next big thing that should be developed? Where are the gaps that are there? And if we end up with a relationship where we're used to talking about the problems that we have, the solutions that people are developing, we're going to come a lot closer to things that are going to be impactful in real life.
That sounds like a fantastic setup, and I can see how a lot of varied perspectives can really bring out some things you may not have considered. I know that collaboration does take work, though. How does Health Everywhere Hub bring together all of these partners to, find the time to make this work possible?
Yeah, and this is a huge hats off to the team that I work with because the the W21C group has had a long history of facilitating, catalyzing collaboration, working with these groups, and understanding that we have to look beyond the people who are just around us in our spaces. So, uh, we used a lot of those networks that we had for outreach, and from those networks, we kind of snowball into other networks, and we recognize, that the world around us is a lot bigger than the university that we work in. It also, as we start thinking about digital health more broadly, not only are we thinking about where patient populations and communities are impacted, but also where some of that innovation and creativity is happening. And it isn't always happening in a university. Sometimes it's happening in a community, in a small clinical center. There's expertise that lives everywhere, and that can be drawn into this. So, the groups that we've been, really working with for the last few years I think have continued to expand and enrich that kind of core group. So we're really ready, I think, for this Living Labs project to bring in some of those folks that we've been building relationships with over the last few years.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. I'm really excited to see what work comes from that. AMedico is the Alberta Medical Device Innovation Consortium, a pan-Alberta network of researchers, industry partners, and community members working to address the need for tailored healthcare technology solutions and interventions poised to reorganize, reinvigorate, and redefine Alberta's medical device sector. Health Everywhere Hub is Alberta's digital health hub, uniting programs, experts, and resources to accelerate the commercialization and scale of e-health and m-health technologies. Both initiatives are supported through the Major Innovation Fund, led by the Alberta Ministry of Technology and Innovation, which enables strategic investments to strengthen Alberta's innovation ecosystem. Maybe you can speak to some of the biggest challenges that are currently facing the OR teams right now. I know there's, like you mentioned, very complex systems and people coming together as well as technology.
Yeah, and this is something that personally, I spent a lot of time thinking about this as a health systems researcher and someone who's interested in surgical safety. So, last year, one of the things that we did is we looked across Canada to understand what provincial and national organizations, governmental and non-governmental organizations, where they felt that the surgical priorities were. And some of the areas that were identified then, which aren't hugely surprising, are things like access to surgery, and particularly equitable access to surgery. So are people able to get into the OR at the times that they need it? And are there patient populations who are seeing disparities that they shouldn't, that should be addressed? Outcomes and quality improvement continue to be like a core goal for these national organizations and provincial organizations. And not only are these traditional sort of patient safety outcomes and adverse events, but also, the patient experience, I think, is really starting to be recognized by groups like Healthcare Excellence Canada and other groups as well. And of course, there's also, what the frontline staff recognize. And so as well as looking at these national and provincial organizations, we surveyed a lot of perioperative staff. And what we found is that they still have a real interest in addressing patient safety issues, but also in addressing that kind of communication, that teamwork, that collaboration. And kind of a final part of me exploring this problem, and in fact, this was actually just last week, is that I sat down with the chairs of surgery from across Canada, and I specifically was asking them about where they felt that innovation was needed in Canada in surgical care. And what they noted was three really top-ranked innovation priorities. There's a bunch of other ones, but one is finding ways of bringing greater evidence-based care into practice. Another is reducing wait times and improving access, which kind of reflects what the national organizations have felt as well. And then the third one is precision surgery, which is really the area that's focused on technology. So these are all of the different areas. I mean, when you asked that question, I don't know if you knew that you were going to get down that rabbit hole, but this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking of. And so there's a lot of different areas, but there's some places where we all come together and say, safety is still important, communication is important, access is critically important, but also we have to respond to the changing environment in the OR and recognize that precision surgery is important, and bringing evidence into practice is more and more critical.
Well, it sounds like you spent a lot of time thinking about that. Naturally, as your three priority areas for the OR Living Labs are team performance and communication, precision and AI integration, and future-proofing OR spaces. So sounds like it aligns with a lot of those areas. And how do you respond to that? What's the plan, I guess, for those priority areas?
And it's a great question. some of these areas like communication, uh, those are things that can be generalizable everywhere, whether you're operating in in a small community hospital, in a large center in Canada, or even in different countries. A lot of these tools and philosophies can be developed that can be scalable everywhere. When we start looking at things like precision surgery, and particularly future-proofing the OR, those are things where understanding the context and the needs of the place where you're working is really critical. And one of the things that we're really interested in is designing our OR spaces and our philosophy around the OR in a way that allows us to bring in innovations in ways that allow us to test them quickly, understand them, and advance the care within those ORs. That's relatively new. There have been some ORs that have developed as innovation OR spaces, but many of those are kind of these built environments which are very static. And what we're interested in is creating spaces that are adaptable and mobile and really focused on understanding what happens when you bring an innovation into an OR space so that you can continue to develop.
Well, that's really exciting to hear about. I feel like there are so many new innovations and ideas coming your way and towards these teams that are going to be trialing them. What does it take to build the trust and readiness within an OR team to actually adopt something new? And what are you hearing from other surgical leaders about where barriers might be lying?
Yeah, I think that is a really critical point. One is that in a lot of places, and Canada, Alberta is no exception. Uh, there's a bit of a fragmentation in how decisions are made and where priorities are set. And there's often a perception of a lack of frontline influence over priority setting. And I feel that to do this really well involves involves really getting those perspectives and experiences and priorities from the people who are working in these environments and making those a voice at the table of decision makers. So there's enthusiasm for advancing surgical care in Alberta. And there's enthusiasm for Alberta becoming, recognized nationally and perhaps internationally as a place that is innovative and introduces technology. And if we want to do that really well, we do have to find a way of dealing with, our traditional bureaucracy. And that was one of the things that came from the surgical chiefs across Canada. So this isn't an Alberta specific thing. When I asked them, what was the greatest barriers that they saw, and I left it really open, pretty much everyone said that they found some version of bureaucracy was the thing that was preventing them from feeling engaged and from feeling that the innovations that were being developed were in line with what they should be. So bureaucracy, finding ways of dealing with that is important. Getting that clinician voice there. And I talk a lot about surgeons, but it's not obviously just surgeons. It's the patients, it's the nurses, anesthesiologists, everyone who works in those perioperative settings. Like those voices are all critically important. And money is always part of the equation as well. And it's one of those barriers that we're going to consistently face when we start thinking about innovations. Many innovations, you can look at something like, for example, enhanced recovery after surgery, which is a care pathway that we use to improve the delivery of surgical care based on best evidence as being cost savings, improves outcomes, is really well suited to an environment where we're looking to be innovative and introducing both technology and non-technologic solutions. But because cost savings doesn't always show up in the budget in a meaningful way, it's often invisible. sometimes it's not prioritized. So you come back to looking at innovations, and cost savings is sometimes difficult for health systems to appreciate. So knowing that investment that's put in, which is like a cost outlay, is going to result in an overall net gain, the argument has to be made. And we have to understand that. We have to have that full global picture of where our money is being spent and where our money is being saved.
A challenge, I'm sure, but it sounds like your team there has done a wonderful job already with the work that you've been accomplishing. So for those listeners that, are future innovators or clinicians or maybe even organizations that might be interested in being a part of this work, what opportunities do initiatives like Health Everywhere Hub or the OR Living Lab create for collaboration and impact?
There's huge opportunity. I mean, one is that even outside of the OR space, and this is what we're talking about today, but we have concepts for living lab development in other areas, such as transitions from hospital to home and rehabilitation, as well as primary care. But even if we just think about the OR space, as soon as we start exploring what a living lab can look like in the OR, and the sheer diversity of voices that we need at the table, and expertise, and enthusiasm above all, like the opportunities are significant. The funding is always a bit of a challenge, finding ways of getting the work funded. But there's also industries. There are innovation-focused granting opportunities. People who are enthusiastic and have good ideas should 100% be approaching, us. Obviously, we're excited and interested and happy to engage with anyone who has ideas that they want to see come to fruition. But even if it's not us, we have other connections and people who are equally as interested. It's not so much about one team doing this. It's about creating an environment where lots of different teams can come and feel that they have access to these resources. And that's kind of what Health Everywhere has tried to do, is to not claim ownership over any of these pieces, but to create an environment where, whether you come from Calgary, Edmonton, or Lethbridge, or a small town, that you have this place that you can go to where this expertise is there.
Well, we really appreciate all the work that you and your team are doing, and thank you so much for enlightening us. I feel like myself, as well as our listeners, are very curious to learn more about the projects that come out. So we look forward to hearing more about that in the future.
Oh yeah, looking forward to being able to tell you about more of these projects as they come up.
Great. As we wrap up today's episode of Advancing Healthcare Through Simulation, we want to thank Dr. Mary Brindle for joining us and sharing her perspective on advancing safer surgical systems and the role of innovation in improving patient care. Today's conversation highlighted how initiatives like the Living Lab ecosystem and the work happening through the Health Everywhere Hub are helping bring clinicians, researchers, and innovators together to tackle some of the most complex challenges in healthcare, especially within the operating room. Thank you so much for listening, and if you're interested in learning more about the OR Living Lab initiative or getting involved in this work, be sure to stay connected with us. This health innovation-themed episode of Advancing Healthcare Through Simulation is brought to you by A-Medico and Health Everywhere Hub.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.